All right. So, welcome everyone. This is the second class in this course called Heart Advice for Death and Dying. So, we're going to go ahead and start with our recitation of the prayers that we usually do before all of our teachings here. And Jana very kindly leads us in those. So, we'll ask her to do that again.
Praise to Shakyamuni Buddha 3 times in English. To the
Founder, the endowed, transcendent destroyer, the one gone beyond, the foe destroyer, the completely perfected, fully awakened being, perfect in knowledge and in good conduct, Sugata, knower of the world, supreme guide of human beings to be tamed, teacher of gods and human beings, to you, the completely and fully awakened one,
the
endowed, transcendent destroyer, the glorious conqueror, the subduer from the Shakya clan, I prostrate, make offerings, and offer refuge.
To the founder,
The endowed, transcendent destroyer, the one gone beyond, the foe destroyer, the completely perfected, fully awakened being, perfect in knowledge and in good conduct, Sugata, knower of the world, supreme guide of human beings to be tamed, teacher of gods and human beings, to you, the completely and fully awakened one, the endowed, transcendent destroyer, the glorious conqueror, the subduer from Shakya clan, I prostrate, make offerings, and for refuge.
to the
The founder, the endowed, transcendent destroyer, the one gone beyond, the foe destroyer, the completely perfected, fully awakened being, perfect in knowledge and in good conduct, Sugata, knower of the world, the supreme guide of human beings to be tamed, teacher of gods and human beings, to you, the completely and fully awakened one, the endowed, transcendent destroyer, the glorious conqueror, the subduer from the Shakya clan, I prostrate, make offerings, and go for refuge.
Short mandala offering once in English. This ground,
Anointed with perfumes, strewn with flowers, adorned with mountain heaven, 4 continents, the sun and the moon. I imagine this is with you to offer it. May all living beings enjoy this pure land.
Idam Guru Ratna Mandala Gambhirya. Refuge in Bodhicitta, once in English, twice in Tibetan. I go for refuge
Refuge until I am enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By the merits I create from listening to the Dharma, may I become a Buddha in order to benefit all sentient beings.
Sangye Chodam Chochi Dhamma Jangchu Vartu Dhammi Prasuchi Dhammi Janyan Yipe Sonanji Drola Penchir Sangye Drupa Shohu Sangye Chodam Chochi Chodam Jangchu Vartu Dhammi Prasuchi Dhammi Janyan Yipe Sonanji
Okay, thank you, Jana. Thank you all. Let's go ahead and do a meditation. So what I'm doing with this course is we're going to do a little bit longer meditation at the beginning of each of the remaining sessions. And tonight we'll take a look at what we examined last week. So those of you who weren't here last week, you'll get a chance to kind of hear the main teaching from last week, and we'll meditate on that a bit. But as usual, we're going to start with just a few minutes of silent meditation on the breath. Most of you have a technique you already use with the breath, and you're welcome to use that. If you need a suggestion, you can tune into the sensation around the tip of the nose, where you feel the air coming in, going out, but just trying to stay present with that sensation. Whenever the mind wanders and we notice that that's happened, let go of whatever distracted you and come back to the breath. So let's go ahead and do some time in meditation. Again, we'll just spend a few minutes in silence, and then I'll lead you in this guided meditation, looking at this first set of meditations that we examined last week. So now, before we do the meditation on the first part of the death awareness contemplation, let's recall one thing I mentioned last week, which is that the reason why we do this, the reason why we're investigating death, our own death and the process of dying and so on, is twofold. First of all, so that we use this life well. These meditations aren't to make us kind of depressed and not want to deal with the world at all. It's to actually spur us on in our spiritual practice so that we use as much of this life as possible to create the causes for happiness and well-being for ourselves, for others. So that's the first reason why we're doing this. The second one is so that when death does come, we feel prepared, feel like we've done what we needed to do. We can die without fear, maybe even die with some level of curiosity or anticipation, kind of ready for death whenever death does come. So that's the reason why we're doing this initially. It's just to turn our minds towards this topic to increase the use of this life in a very meaningful way and also to be prepared for whenever death does come to us. So again, recall that there are three main contemplations. The one we went through last week is around the certainty of our own death. It had 3 points within it. We'll reflect on each of those briefly. The very first one is that everyone has to die. Spend a few minutes kind of reflecting on those beings of the past and all the beings that we heard about when we studied history, all the beings whose biographies we've read, who, have lived in the past, even spiritual leaders, the Buddha himself, Jesus Christ, all these beings have had to die. Even beings that we know in our lives have had to die. And all the beings that we currently have in our lives will also have to die. And therefore, I myself have to die. Kind of bring that home to that reflection on your own mortality. The fact that you too will have to die. Even though we know this, we have to really bring that more deeply into our awareness. So just spend a few minutes kind of focusing on this, looking at the reality of death for so many beings of the past, for all those that are here with us now, and especially for yourself. So hopefully we've come to that conclusion, the inevitability of our own death, because everyone must die. Not a single being has escaped death. The second point examines this reality from a slightly different perspective. The fact that we are growing closer to our death every single moment. We don't know when our death will happen, but the reality is that with every passing moment, we are one moment closer to that event, that experience. And there's different analogies we can use to think about this, such as the grains of sand in an hourglass that are continually descending from the upper chamber to the lower chamber. Every moment, another grain of sand, one less grain of sand in the upper chamber, one less moment in this life. We are growing closer to our death every moment. Other analogies, such as a train that is continually moving towards its destination. And choose something that invites that exploration for you, even just meditating on the breath. With each inhalation and exhalation, one breath closer to death, one less breath in this life. Think about how this is happening all the time. We can't stop it. Every moment, growing closer. Just reflect on that for a few minutes. Try to make that point hit home. The third contemplation isn't really a reason as to why our death is inevitable or kind of exploring that topic to a greater degree. It's looking at the fact that regardless of how much time we have remaining or how much time we've already had, the amount of time that we have for dedicated spiritual practice is actually very small. What do we mean by spiritual practice? In Buddhist terms, it means working with our minds to decrease and eventually eliminate the negative tendencies, the anger, the jealousy, the pride, the greed, the ignorance, and to develop all the positive qualities, our compassion, our loving kindness, patience, generosity, wisdom. How much of our days are we actually doing that? either through formal meditation, through study, through discussion of the Dharma with others, watching videos, teachings, going to teachings like this. When we're not on the cushion or doing those formal elements of practice, to what degree are we working with our minds? Are we trying to diminish our anger, not fall into that habitual pattern so frequently? Are we trying to be more compassionate, loving, caring, kind? It's not to beat ourselves up, it's just to recognize that it takes a lot of effort to make your life full of spiritual practice. Most of us have a portion of our life that is spiritual practice. We would consider in that category. It's very hard to use this life to produce great strides in our spiritual practice, though it can be done. The amount of time we have really quite limited when we look at an ordinary day. How much time we spend sleeping, how much time we then spend maybe exercising, feeding our bodies, preparing food, shopping for the food we eat, talking with others, going out for lunch, whatever the case might be. We fill our days with a lot of things that may not be spiritual practice. So here, just do a personal reflection on your own life. To what degree are you engaged in some level of working on yourself, working on your mind, but acknowledging that the amount of time we have actually is quite limited. So having investigated these three topics, we come to the conclusion as follows. The first we meditated on was the certainty that all beings will die. Everyone has to die, including ourselves. And we looked at the fact that our death is approaching moment by moment, closer and closer every moment. And the fact that we have very little time when it comes down to it for real dedicated spiritual practice. We come to the conclusion that because of those facts, we have to change that. We have to use this life to practice the Dharma, the teachings of the Buddha, or whatever spiritual path we feel inclined to. Use this life while we have it to change our minds, to change our hearts. In Buddhist terms, it is our mind that will go on to our next life. The work we do in this life, changing our minds, is not wasted at all. Carried forward and help us to progress on the path. And let's funnel those thoughts into our motivation for being here. The motivation we want to ideally have is to work on ourselves to the greatest degree, to do that spiritual practice, to change ourselves completely, be rid of everything that obscures our mind, that taints our mind, pollutes our mind, and advance and develop all these amazing qualities that we see in the Dalai Lama and so many other wonderful spiritual teachers in our world. Compassion, love, kindness. we make that commitment to being here with the wish to develop ourselves as much as possible so we then can help others to do the same, recognizing that they are in the exact same predicament as ourselves. We're doing this work on ourselves so we can benefit others. And that's one of the best ways to use this life while we have it. To use our awareness of death to spur us on, to continue moving in that direction, becoming a Buddha eventually, so we can help others to do the same. And open your eyes fully when you're ready and come back into the space together. So again, we looked at those 3 points. This is part of what we call the 9-point death awareness meditation often. So we looked at the first 3 that are all under this main topic of the inevitability of death. Let me go ahead and put on the screen one of the slides that I have for tonight that summarizes that. By the way, this is what we're going to be looking at tonight. We're going to continue with the awareness of death, looking at the second main topic, the uncertainty of the time of death, which is the real impetus for us to kind of begin our practice or to really invigorate our practice because it's uncertain when death will come. It's a bit of a hard topic to look at, but it's where we'll start tonight. Then we're going to look at how we work with our disturbing emotions, especially things we have around death and dying that come up for us when we're examining this, as well as disturbing emotions throughout our lives. And then a little bit on purification. Buddhism teaches a wonderful technique for helping to kind of remove any of these sort of negative seeds, unwholesome seeds that we planted in our minds that we would really like to be free of, so that whenever death comes, we won't be controlled by those or tainted by those. So, oops, I have to go just one slide. This is the 3 root contemplations that we're looking at in this 9-point death awareness meditation. Each of these has 3 points within it. Death is inevitable. The certainty or inevitability of our death was what we looked at last week in the first session, and we just meditated on to review those 3 main points. The second that we're going to do tonight, the time of death is uncertain. We don't know when death is going to come. No one knows when their death will arrive. And then third, what is helpful at the time of death? This is what we'll look at next week when we are here next Thursday. It's kind of examining the things that we tend to rely on in our lives and see whether or not they will be useful when we get to the point of our death, the time of our death, and see from that, well, then what is useful? What is it that we need to rely upon? So this is what we're working with. This is a very classic meditation that's done in Tibetan Buddhism, particularly the tradition coming from Lama Atisha, who brought these amazing Mahayana teachings. Well, he'd been in Tibet for a while, but he came about 1,000 years ago from India and brought the long rim structure, which is what we study in this tradition, which includes this meditation on death. So it's a very kind of concise and wonderful way to get our heads around this topic in terms of these 3 points. So we've talked about before, why we need to do this meditation in general. Well, why do we need specifically to do a meditation on the time of death being uncertain? Well, it's obviously because if that is reality, if in fact, death can come at any time, which is what we're coming to an understanding of through this meditation, well, then we have to be prepared for whenever it comes. We saw this during the pandemic, right? We had many people, a variety of ages who were dying. Sure, it skewed towards the older ages because of the vulnerability of the health of those individuals, particularly in senior homes and what have you, where it spread very rapidly. But you had children dying, you had teenagers dying, you had people in their 20s dying, in their 30s dying. The reality is death will come at a time when we don't even expect it. Even some people who are in hospice right now, I'm betting, still don't think that their death is going to happen that day. They still have some kind of, again, denial of that, and it's uncertain when it will come. And when that does come, are they going to really be ready? Well, and this is the kind of point of this meditation, is to encourage us to be ready so that whenever death comes, we'll feel prepared. We're like, oh, okay, it's going to happen now. It was in a car accident that I ended up, of course, not being fatal, or I wouldn't be here. And it wasn't really a bad accident, but one of the thoughts that went through my mind as the car was pulling in front of me and I was going too fast to stop was, I wonder if this is how I go. We don't know, right? We don't know when it's going to happen and how it's going to happen. And so when that, with that uncertainty, this is a real impetus for us to do what we can every day of our lives. Because if we don't, we won't be prepared when death comes. That's the kind of the rationale for this particular reflection. Maybe I should check and see if there were any questions on what we meditated on before I go further. Sorry, I'm kind of jumping into the new material, but any questions or comments on the review of those 3 points within the inevitability of death, certainty of death? And as I mentioned in last week's class, everyone knows they're going to die, at least at an intellectual level, right? You ask people on the street, well, of course I'm going to die. Everybody dies. Do you live your life that way? That's the big question, right? Do you live your life every day with an awareness that death is in your future? This point brings it even closer, right? Because it says it could be in your future today. Today could be your last day. And for any of us, it's true. We could leave here and not make it to wherever we're headed, not make it home, because that's the nature of our existence. We have death happening, not again that it happens to everyone all the time, but it happens enough for us to have that uncertainty, to not be sure that we're going to live to a ripe old age and what have you. Let's go into the first point on this. Again, it has 3 points for meditation. And by the way, the handout number 3, I'll introduce you to that shortly. It's just a little way of meditating on this that fleshes it out a little bit. And some of what I'm saying is in there, but also some different points. You have access to that by going to the center's website. And there's a link there to the Google Drive where I have all these different meditations and things. The first point that we look at, which might sound kind of strange, human life expectancy is uncertain. It's interesting, in Buddhist cosmology, they do say that there are some human realms, because the Buddha said this isn't the only human realm, that there are a variety of other human realms. There are some human realms where the karma you create to be there actually gives you a much longer life that is much more certain than ours. There's one of them where you absolutely live, every being there lives 1,000 years. Can't imagine. I keep joking about it. I don't know when Social Security would kick in if you're living 1,000 years when you're what, like 965. But anyway, if you have that long of a life, right? If you have this kind of certainty to a lifespan that you go, okay, well, I'm going to live 1,000 years. Then you might think I can waste the first 500 and maybe spend a couple more hundred after that doing something else, and then maybe I'll get down to study in my last and real serious practice. I don't know. I mean, I don't know how that would even work. Regardless of whether that exists or not, this is something, again, that's set out in Buddhist cosmology. We know in this life, there's absolutely no certainty. As I was pointing out just a few minutes ago, you have beings like in the COVID pandemic that were dying all over the board, right? In all different ages. And if you look at the obituaries, this is one kind of exercise you can do to familiarize yourself with this. Look at the obituaries and you'll see, yes, they skew towards the upper ages, right? You tend to see people in 70s, 80s, 90s, sometimes hundreds. But you also see thrown in there occasionally somebody who's like 14 and somebody who's like 25. And, this is the reality of the world we live in. There's no guarantee that you're going to make it to any particular age. But we live our lives with this idea that we're going to be here for a very long time. We're going to have our old age. And maybe we even think, well, when I get retired and my children are gone and everything else has happened, and I can then finally settle down and do some good dedicated meditation and practice. And those of us in the room who are in those age brackets know that that's not always going to happen, right? The other things come into your life. Plus, it gets harder to practice when you don't have as much physical stamina and mental acuity and what have you. So this is just a dream that we have. This is an idea that we have, and it could be interrupted very easily. Suddenly you're not here, and all that planning that you did for some old age and when you would do all this wonderful spiritual practice doesn't happen. So this first one is really to bring home that point that there's no certainty to this. Again, it's an idea, and we live our lives and sometimes get there. Sometimes we get to that old age and we are able to do something somewhat meaningful with it. But why aren't we doing that now? Because death could come now. Death could come today. Lama Zopa Rinpoche, the head of our organization for quite a few years, he was a student of Lama Yeshe's who founded the organization with him. Lama Zopa Rinpoche said that we should live our lives with the thought, I will die today. If every morning you wake up and you go, I didn't die last night. I'm still in this human body. I still have this human intellect, this ability to use my life in a meaningful way to do spiritual practice. Well, what's going to spur me on to do that if I think I will die today? You're not making an affirmation like sometimes people do affirmations like, I will become a great artist or I will do this. Or you're not saying I will die today so that your death happens. You're saying it so that you prepare your mind mentally for that potential occurrence. It could happen today. We've lived our lives, most of us, with the thought, I will not die today. We don't make it consciously. We don't wake up and go, today's not the day I'm going to die. We just live our lives with that type of awareness, thinking, it ain't going to happen today. I don't even think it's going to happen for many years. I don't think it's going to happen until I'm 90 something or whatever. What's interesting is, even when we hear things like human life expectancy on these statistics that they throw together, I looked them up for this course in particular because I was curious where things are at. Because I think the COVID pandemic did take the numbers down a little bit because, people were dying at much earlier ages. And so the statistics would show that. But what I found on the internet in the United States, women live 82.2 years. That's their average life expectancy.
Really?
Men, 77.4. The combined is 79.8. Worldwide, of course, it's much less because of conditions we have in the United States generally are better in terms of medical care and what have you. The men are 71.2, women 76.4 for a combined of 73.8, which is about 74. So almost 80 in the US versus 74 combined.
Your data is old.
This is what's on the internet, but anyway.
I just read
Yeah.
that the US is lower than every other developed country.
Well, we're number 62 in the
Oh.
list. So this isn't saying we're better than the worldwide average, but we're not better than all the countries in the world. We're in fact 62nd. There are 61 countries that have longer life expectancy than we do.
Oh,
Yeah. But even when we hear those numbers, I mean, I see this for myself. Like, okay, I'm a male in the United States, 77.4. I think I'll live longer than that, right? We tend to think that that's not talking to me. That's an average. And there are a lot of people dying a lot younger than that. And I'm already, at whatever age. And so we have, again, no guarantee on any of this. Death can come any particular day. It's not going to, matter if, oh, I'm sorry, I wait a second. I haven't reached my average life expectancy. I'm not 77.4 yet. You have to kind of come back then. Death will come whenever death comes. So this is an important meditation. This first point is just to really get that reality. We're living with that all the time, that this life expectancy is not certain. The second one, next one underlined there, is kind of an interesting reflection. And you might think, wow, this is going to make me really paranoid. But there are many causes of death. Now, it's not to say that everything around us can cause our death, but some things actually could cause our death given the right situation, the wrong situation and circumstances. It's usually an examination, and in the meditation that you have that you can, pull off the internet and work with, they divide it into three main areas. There are three sort of groupings of things that could cause your death. And it's just, again, not to think that we're surrounded by these things all the time, but those things are out there as potential causes. The first one is things that are external to us. And this is often the things we hear about and read about, right? Earthquakes and fires and car accidents and plane crashes and, all the things with the elements and all the various things in our world that can suddenly come into our lives and being in the wrong place at the wrong time. And that's the end of our life. There's a lot of external factors like that, right? I don't think I mentioned this last week. Maybe I did. But while I was I was doing a little bit of preparation for this by doing my death awareness meditation as my practice when I was on retreat, staying at the home of some friends in Sapeo near Mora. And 2 or 3 days before I went into their house to, house sit for them and do retreat there, they told me that it had snowed and there were bear paw prints in the snow.
Oh,
And so the bear was around, and and actually there was a sign later that the bear was there while I was on retreat. And every day when I went out for a bit of a walk on their acreage there, I was thinking, this puts my death awareness meditation in a slightly different light. If this bear is really hungry from hibernating for several months, I might look like a good snack at least. But again, it's those things are there all the time, right? We don't think of bears or mountain lions or whatever, but they are out there, and you could run into those beings while you're out there doing your hike, or you could run into very many other things that are external to you. That's one of the ways we can look at the causes of death, being quite a few, actually. The second one is internal causes of death, things going wrong with your own body. Right? And this happens in our world frequently now. Of course, cancer is on the rise because of, again, perhaps the world we live in and so many contaminants and things that we put into our environment and into our own bodies and what have you. Cancer can be happening in a body for quite some time. I remember hearing from a good friend of mine, one of his good friends who I had met before. I didn't really know him horribly well, but the story he told me, I don't know if it's completely accurate, was that he started experiencing some shortness of breath. And I guess by the time he got to the doctor found that he had stage 4 lung cancer, and he died within days. And, so you can have this going on in your body for quite some time. We have internal causes of death that can happen very suddenly, such as like a blood clot that ends up going to the heart or the brain or what have you, and then suddenly you've got a stroke, a heart attack. We have, things that can go wrong with malfunctioning of our various internal organs. We have a lot of things that can happen with this body. Again, not to freak you out, just to recognize that you're living with that sort of vulnerability all the time of things happening inside, again, as well as outside, external to you. The third contemplation is to look at the fact that even the things that we indulge in to keep this body alive, to keep this life going, can sometimes be the cause of our death. Sometimes people overdose on medications that they have, or they get the wrong medication from the pharmacy, or they even are eating food that they think is going to be healthy and nourishing for them that is contaminated by various things. Quite a few years ago, there was this case of spinach, organic spinach, that was being grown in California and being shipped all over the country. And they found it was tainted with E. coli, and people were dying from E. coli. And here you have people, eating organic spinach. They want to eat organic foods. They want to eat healthy things. They want to live long. They want to have a good body and good health. Sometimes those things that we take to sustain our health that we think are going to be beneficial for us actually end up being the cause of our death. And as I said, meditating on these three things, external to us, internal to us, even some of the things we take to sustain this life being potentially the cause of our death, are not to make us paranoid, to where you just sit in your home and you get a food taster to make sure you're not eating any contaminated food, and you do everything to kind of avoid getting into cars or into planes or any. You can still die in your home, right? There's gas lines that break and houses explode. And certainly when I was living in California, there was always the chance of an earthquake happening and some people dying in their homes from just the house collapsing on them. Fires happen, lots of stuff happens. You can't live your life with this sort of like paranoid view of everything out to get you. But holding the awareness that there are many causes of death is useful to once more bring home the point that we don't know when our death's going to come. And we have to be ready for that. Because it could happen in any one of those ways that I was talking about, right? Suddenly and even going back to the vulnerability of this body, and the kind of causes of death. And look at how small the coronavirus was. We couldn't even see it with the human eye, right? This thing that's being transmitted by people breathing and people inhaling it into their system, right? And then it began multiplying and increasing, and it caused the death of so many people in our world. That leads us actually to the third point. Let me go ahead and put that on the screen. Having contemplated that there are many causes of death, this is sort of an auxiliary thought to it in a sense, that our human body, this human body that we have, is actually very fragile. We live our lives thinking we're quite resilient and that we, again, invest in a lot of time and energy to make sure that we're exercising enough and that we're eating well enough and we have our immune system all pumped up. But you can still be overcome by very small things like the COVID virus. I remember there was one man in particular who was an athlete. I don't remember what, a soccer player or something, really in the prime of his life, who died from COVID. In the early parts of the pandemic, when, of course, it was just an onslaught of people in the emergency rooms and what have you. This is the reality that we think that our bodies are actually quite robust, but the body can be defeated really, really quickly. And again, by something really quite insignificant. So don't go around with this delusion of thinking, oh, I'm in this great health. I don't have to worry about death. And as long as, so you were just talking, Anne Marie, about somebody who's like 85 that you saw in the video that's like dancing and doing, what was she doing? She was,
Oh, I don't,
yeah, yoga and all this other, I mean, and those are great. Yeah, do those things, but don't suffer from the delusion of thinking that doing all of that is going to keep death from happening. You still could have death any particular day because the body is really quite vulnerable. I meant to look up this man's name. I found it in some of my research for the teaching this time. There's an individual, Brian, I want to say like Johnson or something. He's a billionaire who made a lot of money off of medical tech field or something. He has formed his own view that he's going to avoid death. This is the perspective he's trying to live his life with. He even has a kind of collection of people that have all supported him and are all in the same camp. Go to don'tdie.com. Seriously, people can sign up there to be a part of his movement of curtailing death, avoiding death. This man himself, because of all the wealth he has, he's able to spend $2 million a year in all these various things that he think are going to keep him from having to die. And sleeping with oxygen on, always doing various things to protect his environment and keep all this. And so he's really invested in like doing everything he can to make sure that he lives and never dies. I start questioning, I mean, he may be a Buddha, he may be an enlightened being for all I know, but I go, is this really the best use of this human life to try to avoid death? What we're talking about here is the exact opposite, to really make good use of this life in terms of one's spiritual practice, because we accept the reality of death, because we know that that's an inevitable part of this life. Now, again, if you do, we talked about last week how the Buddhist path is one that leads to eventually being free of the causes that keep us in this conditioned existence, where we do have to experience birth and illness and aging and death. You can have that freedom. That freedom doesn't come from $2 million a year spent on various medical treatments and things. It comes from doing spiritual practice. So the conclusion that we come to on the basis of these reflections is not that we should hold on to this life and do everything we can with all of our time to keep death from happening. It's to recognize that death is going to come at some point, and it is completely uncertain when that is. And therefore, as is on the screen now, the time of my death is uncertain. Therefore, I have to practice Dharma. I have to engage in spiritual practice now. Because I may not get to my ripe old age and have all this time for retreat or whatever, all these kinds of things that might be wonderful to do at that age if you have the wherewithal and the ability to do that. We have to use our life meaningfully now. And as I was saying earlier, what do we mean by spiritual practice? Spiritual practice can mean some of the things that we do in Tibetan Buddhism, these various practices like the one I'm going to lead on Sunday. Sunday's a big Buddha day. We have like 4 major Buddha days in the calendar and the lunar calendar. And this one is the biggest because it commemorates the birth, the enlightenment, and the passing into nirvana of the Buddha. So it's the biggest Buddha day of the calendar. It's the full moon day of the 4th lunar month. Anyway, we're going to be leading this practice. It's a nice little practice on generating compassion, invoking the Buddha of compassion. That's spiritual practice, like trying to cultivate compassion in our hearts there. And other forms of spiritual practice or study, other forms of meditation, those are all an important part of our spiritual practice. I was just reading a quote earlier today that came in from one of the Buddhist sites that said, all of that work you do and kind of your meditation on the cushion is like the preparation for when you're off the cushion. When you're off the cushion is when you're really supposed to be doing the spiritual practice. how are we when we're at work or when we're dealing with friends or with people we don't care for in our life, relatives that are challenging or what have you? How do we kind of maneuver our minds around all those various situations? How do we work with our minds so that we are more caring, compassionate, kind, and not angry and upset and jealous and all these other things? That's the real spiritual practice. And that's why we have to begin it now. And whatever your life looks like, even if you have a life where you're working so many hours a day and doing all things, you can do that with spiritual practice. Just have to be sure to be mindful of that and incorporate that into your day so that that becomes who you are. You're not some different person doing your spiritual practice and then this horrible, awful, kind of angry, upset person when you're living your normal life. It's all meant to be a continuity of practice. We have to do it now. We can't wait. Again, we've had that thought or that idea that we're not going to die today, every day of our life to some degree. And we've been right so far, right? We're all here. So we've been right. But there's going to be a day when we're going to be wrong. That is inevitable. One day, that day when death comes into our life, we will be wrong. And we will have lived the rest of those days without much attention to our spiritual practice. So that's the consequence if we don't take this meditation to heart. We need to really examine it and say, yes, it is uncertain when I'm going to die. Therefore, I have to do everything I can every day, not like go crazy and completely abandon any sort of regard for your life, but recognize that those things are secondary. Our mundane concerns are secondary. Our spiritual concerns are primary. That's what we're here for in Buddhist terms. We're here to develop our minds, our hearts, to become the beings that we have the potential to become, which in Buddhist terms is a Buddha, a fully awakened being. A Buddha is a person who has completely removed everything that is negative and taints the mind and has completely advanced and developed everything that is positive. Sounds like a good deal to me. Yeah, sounds like what I want to do. We see it in many of our teachers, as I mentioned earlier, the qualities of kindness and compassion we see in the Dalai Lama or Thich Nhat Hanh, even some of the leaders from other spiritual traditions, right? Who we feel inspired by. Their presence is very moving to us because they have those qualities and aren't coming from a place of these delusions, afflictions, that we're going to be looking at shortly. So this is an important part of the meditation. In fact, Lama Tsongkhapa, who is renowned for being sort of the founder of the tradition we study here, what's called the Geluk tradition of Tibetan Buddhism, he didn't intend to find like a whole tradition, but it formed after his passing and what have you. He said this is the most important of the death awareness meditations. The first one, inevitability of death, yeah, you have to do that. And that's definitely a part of it. But the second one on the uncertainty of when you will die, this is the one that's going to get you off your, whatever you're doing and on your cushion there and doing the work while you're up and about and living your life. Because we see it's important that we do that every day. I was reading one quote that said, I can't remember who this was from, maybe Lama Zopa Rinpoche. He says, if death doesn't come that day, say you wake up in the morning and you go, that could come today. Even if just like, it could come today, not it will come today. It could come today. Well, if you get to the end of the day and it didn't come, you go to bed, well, you still used that day well then, right? You did something meaningful with it. You lived your life with that thought of it could happen today. Therefore, I have to be really attentive to my mind. I have to make sure that I'm not getting angry at everybody that slights me in the least. I have to make sure that I'm doing everything I can to cultivate these positive states. And well, then you've used that day well. You can go to bed rejoicing at what you did. Wake up the next morning, hopefully, you won't die in your sleep, and you say, could die today, though. Then I'm going to need to use this day well. When you get to the end of that day, if you do make it to the end of that day, then you can feel good that you used another day well. Makes sense. It's a much better way to live our lives, I think. Let's check in and see any thoughts or comments on that set of reflections. Yeah, Jana.
Reflecting on the death teachings and in the basic program,
When we're going to
death
that
and
one.
impermanence.
Mhm.
I was reflecting on, somebody who's been in the news a lot recently, Kyle Bosch, who's a
Mm.
very well-known NASCAR driver who,
Yeah.
wasn't feeling well, had a huge win, even though he wasn't feeling well. had pneumonia, it turns out, got septic, died the next day,
Yeah.
41 years old.
Right.
And they're pretty fit
Sure.
race. So, seeing that over and over again, I was really reflecting on, he just thought, oh, I'm not feeling so good. I had the doctor come to my trailer racing, then he has to cancel a race. And then all of a sudden it's like, boom, I'm really sick, died the next day.
Too much. Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's good to hear those stories and,
Yeah.
and to get the details. Sometimes when you look at the obituaries, they don't talk about the cause of death.
Yeah.
So that's one of the things that when we hear about people who are well known in the
Yeah.
world who have some fame and they go really quickly like that, you
Yeah.
kind of get the message, wow, that could be me.
Yeah.
I know Venerable Rabina, who many of you know, whenever she has a student from New Mexico that I inform her, the student has passed away, she says, all I can think is someday that'll be me.
Mm.
Someday that will be, oh, did you hear Venerable Rabina die? Somebody, and we have to think that way. When we hear about somebody else dying, when we hear about a NASCAR racer or whoever, that could be me. One day that will be me. And I don't know when that's going to happen. Yeah, San Marie. Oh, I'm sorry. Do you need to say something on that? Because Mary Jo Furco has her hand up as well. But
No, I just wanted to know if you think practicing meditation and Buddhism makes you live longer.
Longer than what? I mean, that's the thing is too.
Than our average.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I hear of Buddhist students, friends of mine who die at young ages too, in their 20s, 30s.
But which is more important, quantity or quality?
Exactly. They're living their lives at least with that, good purpose and what have you. Because again, in Buddhist terms, we touched on this a little bit last week. You have karma as the agent behind all of this. So when your death happens and how it happens and so on is a karmic incident. It's created the causes for it and it will happen. And we're not aware of all that, right? We don't get a karmic statement from a karmic bank every month and saying, oh, you've got these karmas you need to clear up and you've got a whole lot of good karmas you've created, but you're depleting them really quickly. And we have no idea all the stuff we did. So we just use this life well, regardless of how and when death is going to come. Yeah, I agree with Earl. I mean, it's more quality than quantity. If we get 20 really good years out of this life in terms of good practice and good dedicated stuff versus 80 years where 90% of the time we're not doing anything spiritual, well, I don't know. Let's go to Mary Jo Furco online. Yes, and hopefully we can hear you here. Can everyone
Okay,
hear?
good. So I love doing the death meditations in the morning. It brings a peacefulness throughout the day. But I've also noticed that underneath that, I still think, oh, it's not today. Oh, it's not going to be today. I catch that, and it's, I don't know how to get rid of that, because I still, even though, I can feel it and I'm moved emotionally and mentally, but yet I'm like, no, not today. I don't know how to get rid of that part.
I think it takes a long time to overcome that, and so it just is a matter of you keep doing the meditation, you keep doing it and waking up every morning with those thoughts and reflecting on it, and it will diminish over time. But I get that too. Sometimes I have too many things to do today. Death can't come today. But the reality is we're all going to die with a hell of a lot of things on our to-do list.
Yeah.
Things that we wanted to do or that we thought we would do or whatever. So, we have to keep using those kind of antidotes to those thoughts, thinking, well, again, there's nothing about me in particular that's that special, that death can't come for me today. There's nothing about my schedule and the work I do or whatever that is I think I'm contributing to the world at large. That means that I'm somehow immune to death happening today. But it takes a while for, as Venerable Rabino would say, for the penny to drop, it's I think a British phrase or something. It takes a while for it to really hit home and for us to be able to overcome that impulse of thinking, it's not going to be today. It's not going to be today. Yeah, Earl, did you want to share something on that?
I've always had this relationship with it that as soon as death happens, that's it. No more work. Nothing more to do. And so the recognition that, well, death could come today,
Uh,
but I'd better have a backup plan in case it doesn't. And that's working the Dharma.
yeah,
That is it could come today, but if it doesn't, I'd better spend today working on the Dharma, because as soon as it happens,
uh,
I'm finished working the Dharma.
that's for this life. Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah.
Quite so.
Yeah. So yeah, it's good to have that kind of awareness, and then that spurs us on. Well, then I need to do the work, because if death doesn't come, well, then I
Better have a backup plan.
yeah, you need your backup plan. You need your yeah. No, I think these are all good thoughts that can accompany these meditations, and it's hard, Mary Jo, to get to a place where we can go, yeah, I'm living with that awareness. It's actually there, and I'm not having that secondary thought that keeps interrupting, thinking, but not today, but not today. It'll go away over time. Anything else from anyone? Thanks for sharing that. Thank you all for the what you shared. Yes,
I
Peggy.
was thinking about my childhood. And for some reason, this takes me back to being a child and waking up in the morning. The sun's in my room. It's on the bed. I cannot stay in bed another second. I got to get up and live. There is so much to live for today, and I'm so excited. I'm going to miss something if I stay in bed.
Right.
And at that point, I had no understanding of death at all. I'd
Right.
never experienced anything about death. I never even really heard about death.
Huh.
But life itself it's so exciting to live.
Absolutely.
And
Hmm.
I kind of miss that wow that I had as a kid, but I try to be in the present time with joy and appreciating and gratitude for the beauty and just the amazing thing about being alive.
And
And so, yes, knocking on the door, it's pretty close, but I'm still alive. So
Yeah.
I have to say I'm grateful right now, because this is the first opportunity I've had in a long time to spend time with Earl here without family, without any distractions, with no responsibilities other than studying and practicing.
wonderful.
So that's our plan.
That's the plan. Hopefully you'll have many
Gonna try that out.
years for that plan but you need a backup plan. But maybe that is your backup.
That is it.
It's not like we've never done that, but to be able to focus so intensively on it for the first time is
Yeah.
wow.
Well, and again, we have that Latin phrase, right? Carpe diem, and like people take it in worldly terms of like, I have to seize the day and go for the gusto and get all this kind of, get your bucket list done and all these sorts of things. And in a spiritual sense, it's still carpe diem, but it means seize the day to use for spiritual practice, because that day is another day that's going to be gone. It's another grain of sand, several grains of sand that have come down that you're never going to get again. And so it's a bit of that excitement. These thoughts, once more, are intended to make us morose and think, oh my gosh, death, it's all like a big gray cloud hanging over me. It's to actually make you feel some joy and commitment to living your life fully. To really be dedicated to the
It's a
Dharma.
real gift to actually have the time to do that,
Absolutely.
because not everybody in the world has the luxury of having the time to
Yeah.
focus on the Dharma.
Mhm. There's
Really rare.
one Tibetan teaching where it talks about like the first 20 years of our life, we're caught up in all the stuff that we need to do to kind of get to some sort of adulthood. And then the next 20 years of your life, you're caught up in making, creating your family and your career and all this stuff. The next 20 years of your life, and by the time you get to the last 20 years, if you even get there, it's not much time, right? And we don't often even have the leisure. Some people once more get to their older years and don't have the physical stamina, or maybe again the mental acuity has diminished to some degree. We have to use what we can, whatever age we are, with the understanding that death could come at any time, to do the work we're here to do. Also reminded me of there was the book, remember Jonathan Bach, who wrote Jonathan Livingston Seagull? No, Richard Bach, I'm sorry. Jonathan Livingston Seagull. There's a book he wrote called Illusions, Adventures of a Reluctant Messiah. It was kind of interesting. There's one phrase in there that I have to look it up to get the exact wording of it, but he says, if you want to know whether your work here is done or not. Well, if you're still here, it isn't. It's kind of like, if we're still here, well, then the work is still what we need to do, and until we get to that final point, like Earl's talking about, where the work's done for this life, if we're still here, the work is still there to be done. And so we have to every day get up with that kind of roll up our sleeves and some joyous partaking of these teachings and really doing what we can that's meaningful and delightful with this life. Because Dharma should be fun. I had one teacher tell me that if you're practicing Dharma and it's not fun, you're doing it wrong. It should be delightful. We should feel really good about what we're doing. Yes, it's hard work. It's rolling up our sleeves and getting in there and working with our minds. Venerable Ravina, sometimes she describes it as like being a good Buddhist doesn't mean kind of sitting there, all just in like this peaceful, blissful state. Being a good Buddhist means getting your hands in your own shit. Like really picking it apart and doing the work. But we benefit from that work. We become better people. We become more loving and kind and caring and connected to others, appreciative of others, grateful, because we're doing the work. So again, these aren't meant to be morose meditations on death that are rubbing our nose in it. They're to give us the awareness of the preciousness of this life. I think there's even a nice little quote. Maybe we can read that. I'll read that, and then we'll take our little break and come back and finish up the topics for tonight. Let me see if I can find this here. I may have to. This is from Larry Rosenberg's. Here, this is the quote. Might be a little longer. It's about a paragraph. At about this point in the contemplations, we begin to feel that the whole thing is senseless, that these contemplations are the concoction of a wicked and morbid imagination, and that if we listen to them anymore, we'll be too depressed even to live. So it is good to pause here with a word of warning. Of course, this view of things, he says, is morbid and depressing. I would maybe contest that, but he says it's overwhelming when presented all at once. And of course, there are many wonderful things in life. But the fact that life is impermanent and uncertain does not mean that it is worthless. Seen correctly, these facts make life more precious. They show us that every moment is a gift. And he goes on from there, but that's really the crux of this, is we're not doing these meditations and doing this course together so that we become like, talk about death all the time and bring everyone down and nobody wants to hang around with us or something. It's to use it in our lives to really hold on to the value of this life and use it well. Okay, let's take our little break. It'll take about 10 minutes or so. We do have some food that people have brought in that you're welcome to partake of, and so we'll reconvene at around let's say 18 minutes after the hour. I'll ring the bell to bring everyone on back in. Okay.
I love having.
Okay.
Teaching.
All right. We took a little longer break than what we had said, but that's perfectly fine. We've instituted those breaks, by the way. We used to do a 2-hour class and then a little bit of a break, but it just is helpful to have people be able to talk to each other and get to know each other. So,
Suggested that they take a break here.
yeah,
I don't want to sit down for 2.5 hours.
and that's the other side of it.
Yeah, there you go.
But hopefully tonight we won't go quite 2 hours. I've been trying to cut it off right around 7:45, just so you know. So we've got about a half hour, a little less than a half hour. I want to kind of share the topics that I'm going through for the remainder of this, and I'll just talk about them a bit. It's not maybe necessary to spend quite so much time on these. Whoops. The second topic that I wanted to present tonight, whoops, I forgot my microphone. Oops, sorry. Okay, so the second topic that I'm going to present tonight is working with disturbing emotions. Disturbing emotions, of course, are a part of the Buddhist, view of our landscape. Our mental landscape includes things that we would call disturbing, or maybe even, negative, unwholesome. But these are just things that again arise in our mind due to the fact that we have some familiarity with them, due to the fact that we create the causes for them. They're not an inherent part of our minds. I mean, in Buddhism, this is going to be one of the ways we can reflect on these, is we recognize that our minds are fundamentally pure and clear. I often use the example of a glass of water. If I had a glass of water here in my hand, and you could see the clarity of it, right? Because it's not tainted and polluted with anything that is going to interfere with that clarity. But if I were to go out into the garden out here and start spooning some dirt into the water and mixing it all up, it would become opaque. You wouldn't be able to have that clarity manifested. It doesn't mean the clarity is gone. It just means that for the moment, the pollution is there, the dirt is there, and the clarity is not manifest. If you run that water through a very fine filter, all of that dirt, all the sediment, all the pollution, all that is removed, and the clarity of the water is there again. This is what our minds are. They're fundamentally pure, but we have these pollutants that have come into our minds that we just keep perpetuating. We just keep doing the same thing habitually. We have anger, and we have jealousy, and we have this out of control desire, and we have greed, and we have, the ignorance that is kind of driving the whole show. All of these things are there. They use this term adventitiously. It means that they are there because you haven't created the causes to remove them. And the Buddhist path is the process of removing it, removing everything that is negative and replacing it with these wonderful positive qualities that are often the antidote to those. I mean, for example, hatred. Hatred is, of course, a pretty strong word, but even just a dislike of people that we have, dislike of political figures, dislike of people who we don't agree with in terms of their views or what they're doing. Those sorts of things can be replaced with loving kindness, with actually seeing those beings in a more loving stance. And again, Buddhism has no monopoly on this. This is taught in almost every spiritual tradition, that love, compassion, all of these are the qualities that are most in tune with our own human hearts and with how we want to be in the world. All of those can be, again, grown to a limitless degree, and they act as sort of the counterforce to all of the things that are negative in our minds. This is how we tend to work with disturbing emotions in Buddhism, is we work with things that are grounded in reality and are more productive and beneficial and much more fun to be with than our anger and jealousy and pride and all these other things. So disturbing emotions are nothing to be afraid of. They're the work we have here to do. This is what we're here to accomplish, is to overcome these. Now, we're going to talk about them maybe in a more specific vein in terms of when we start approaching the topic of death, because death can bring up some of these emotions for us. Let me put the list. I want to first talk about how to work with these things in general, and then we'll go through the list. The general advice, of course, is to accept that we have these disturbing emotions and acknowledge them kind of non-judgmentally. Oh, there you are. There's my anger. Okay, it's arising again. I can see it. Try not to get stuck in it. Don't kind of keep circulating it, kind of do the hamster wheel of these disturbing emotions. We have a tendency to do that in kind of our rumination, where we just keep going over and over again our negative thoughts towards somebody who has harmed us or who does things in the world that we disagree with, what have you. Thirdly, recognize you have a choice. This is the one of the biggest lessons that we learn in Buddhism, is that you actually have a choice as to what you want to think. It's
I
not,
disagree with that.
you disagree with it. Okay.
Yeah.
What's your name, by the way?
Joanna,
Joanna. Yes.
grief
Grief.
is a whole nother kettle of fish.
But how we work with grief, we do have some choice about it, right? I mean, we do have certain emotional feelings or things that do arise, sadness, grief, that we can choose how we work with that to some degree.
I don't think so.
You don't think so?
Honestly, no.
I would say that we do. I mean, my own experience, I've gone through grief of a number of people in my life, and I think that there is an avenue of choice in terms of how I'm going to learn from that and work with it.
But there's like anger, denial, all these things that are part of grief. I now recognize grief as an emotion,
Sure.
which it is,
Yeah.
But I'm just saying some of those things are really unavoidable if you were really in love with the person.
True. But I do think that grief has many facets to it. And I don't want to, I mean, my own experience is that I don't think it's a singular phenomenon that is always going to be in the nature of something I can't work with. In fact, I tend to think, from my own experience with grief, that it's almost always something I can work with and learn from. And it does mean kind of what I'm saying here, even the first point, accept grief, acknowledge it, bring it in, invite it in, say, okay, here's my grief. What can I learn from you? How can I grow to really embrace this as a facet of my life? And that's, again, what we're doing around death, too, when we're looking at our own mortality, or certainly when we have the death of others in our lives that we're grieving from. So and that's what, I mean, when I say you have a choice, it's not like saying, okay, I'm going to shut that off. It means that I'm going to choose how I'm going to work with this. Like, if somebody approaches this topic and say they don't have the grounding in Buddhism, maybe you go to a party or something and you say, oh, yeah, I'm going to this class and we're talking about how death is inevitable and how it's uncertain when it's going to happen. Somebody may like freak out at this, right? They hear that particular teaching and their mind just goes out of control because they don't have any way of grounding that into something that could actually be beneficial to think about. And that's kind of the way I'm thinking of grief, is that we have an experience of it, yes, that can be provoke some anger, can provoke some other emotions, but there is another side to it as well that we can learn from. So I actually do a little course called Learning from Grief that I've done in a number of times. And I think that's, again, I don't have a monopoly on this by any means. I've never been a grief counselor in any way, just dealt with my own situations of grief and how I process them. The fourth point is an important one too, to learn not to identify with them, to not think that you are your anger or you are your grief. We're much bigger than that. Talking about grief, David Kessler, who worked with Elizabeth Kubler-Ross around the 5 stages of grief, he says, it's not that our grief gets smaller, it's that we get bigger. And so this is what happens, that we still carry that grief, or we still carry our own impressions from various things that have happened, but we're not so strongly identifying with them. We're creating kind of a bigger person of who we are while we're holding on to these various things as a part of the, again, landscape of our minds. There are some of these negative emotions or disturbing emotions that we can, the Buddha says, be rid of, if you will, that are, something that we can work on and eventually undermine. Grief, it's kind of an interesting one. I tend to think that even Buddhist grief, as fine as the Dalai Lama has talked about how much he grieved when his mother passed away. So if the Dalai Lama grieves, it's a healthy thing, right? It's a part of life. It's sadness that happens with loss, with being separated from what one is dear to, what is we appreciate and value and love in our lives. So. Okay, let me go back to just these few other things that are general advice around working with some of these disturbing emotions. Remember again the nature of your mind, that there's nothing kind of permanent about that. It arises in the mind due to various causes and conditions, and it will change within the nature of our minds. It's not, again, set or unchanging. Recall that others also experience these. I mean, this is one of the things why, going back to the topic of grief that Joanne, right, it's brought up. That's why I found it, the initial experience I had with grief back in 1992 when I lost my first partner to AIDS, and that's actually how I found the Buddhist path, was a grief support group where you're with other people who are going through the same process as you. You come to understand that this isn't some unique experience that's only happening to me. You actually see that other people have these same emotions as well. And, this is true for any of these things we're talking about. People have anger just like us. People have a denial of death just like us. People have all these various things that are common human experiences. So it's not meant to burst some sort of bubble of thinking we're sort of special and unique, but to get us to recognize that there's a whole nother avenue of coming to accept and work with these emotions because they're not unique. They are a part of the human experience. Something that we all can learn from and sort of process through. Let me pull up the last few things on this, kind of working with them in general. Do a reality check. Sometimes we do need to sort of stop and say, okay, where's my mind going? And am I getting into a place of more exaggeration and things that are maybe not so healthy for me? And I need to kind of pull it back to just acknowledging what reality is. Acknowledging the reality of death, the loss, whatever, that is coming up for it. The specific advice that I have, I'm not going to go into this in great detail, but certainly denial is always on the list it's among the 5 things that are the steps for coming to some level of acceptance, which is generally taught as the final one in regard to death, our own death, but also, of course, even with regard to loss. I might mention that when these 5 are taught in the context of grief, but they're not really taught in such a linear way. Grief is a very different phenomenon than coming to accept one's own mortality. It has a kind of its own involvement with all of this, but denial can often be a part of it. And certainly when we're examining death and the way we're doing in this course, denial of our own mortality, or even that day-to-day thing of like, yeah, but it's not going to happen today, like Mary Jo Furco was talking about, right? You know, we that is something that, again, we all experience. We have to once more just keep working with that understanding of that inevitability of death and the uncertainty of when it will come. Keep doing the reflections every day, and that denial will go away in time. We might still carry around some residual part of it for some period of time. Just takes whatever it takes, you know, the amount of practice we need to kind of get over that level of denial. Anger certainly can arise for people, not just around death, dying, loss, but it can arise in our daily lives on the basis of so many things. Just turn on the news sometimes and you can have anger arising pretty quickly, right? That's some of the things we see going on in our world. Anger is one of the most sort of dangerous and destructive emotions that we have. And we see that happening in our world often, right? Where somebody, and look at instances of road rage. I always bring up the first road rage incident I heard of when I heard that term used. I was living in the Bay Area in San Francisco, and I heard about down the peninsula, there were two men who were both thinking that the spot in the front of the parking lot at the 7-Eleven was theirs. One managed to get into it before the other one. The other one got out of their car, accosted that person. The other one of these two gentlemen had a gun in their glove compartment, took the gun out, and shot the other man. Talk about death happening suddenly. You think you're going to the 7-Eleven and you're just fighting over a parking spot, which is like also very hard to believe, right? But people do it, right? People get into that, I'm right, you're wrong, and you need to back off and do what's right and give me that spot. Really crazy stuff to lose your life over, right? I'm not saying we all are prone to do that, but we all have the anger that could develop into that. So we all have some level of anger. Anger is when we encounter something unpleasant, something difficult, something challenging, and we tend to exaggerate the unpleasantness of that. And we want to do whatever we can to be separated from it. Well, again, what I was talking about earlier, we actually can learn from these emotions. Welcome your anger in, you know, say, oh, anger, what do you have to teach me? Anger can often point out the degree to which maybe we are quite self-centered in the moment, where we're only thinking about ourselves and our need to have that parking spot or to have whatever it is that we are claiming to own or possess that the other person is threatening. You know, anger can be a tool to help us to really investigate our minds. And of course, anger can also be an avenue, as I was mentioning earlier, when anger becomes hatred, for actually cultivating loving kindness towards that being, when we begin to see that they're just like us. You know, they're just reacting from that place of their habitual anger, and we might even feel some compassion for them, some concern for them. Again, all of these can be antidotes to it, but again, don't expect that you can just flip a switch and suddenly you're the most loving, kind, caring, compassionate person in the parking lot and everyone gets whatever they want. You're going to be fighting your ego and your self-centeredness for a while. But recognize that, again, we have techniques taught in Buddhism that help us to overcome these. And they're grounded, of course, in our meditation. You can't possibly, keep your anger from arising if you don't have some skill in working with the thoughts that are going to counter it, the loving kindness, compassion, what have you. Fear, anxiety, this is a big emotion that we have in our culture and in our lives. Yeah, take a look at it, see how realistic is it, or is this something we really need to accept? There's a wonderful little verse from Master Shantideva. Most of you know this great 8th century Indian Buddhist saint who wrote The Guide to the Bodhisattva's Way of Life. A really amazing text to study if you ever get a chance. The 6th chapter is all about patience and how we develop patience in the face of challenging situations where we're suffering or people are harming us. The 10th verse of that says along these lines, I'm paraphrasing a little bit, if it's something we can do something about, well, why have fear? Why get anxious? Why get stressed? Do that, right? If it's something you can actually do something about, then put your attention there. If it's something you cannot do anything about, that's the second half of the verse, well then what use is your fear, your anxiety, your stress? Because it's not going to help. We'd be much better to accept the reality of those things. If we look at this whole topic of death in terms of fear and anxiety arising, well, we have both of those perspectives hold true. Let's go to the second one first. Death is something we cannot do anything about in terms of the reality of it. That's the first point we meditated on last week, right? It's inevitable that every one of us will die. So instead of being fearful and anxious and stressful, accept that reality. That's what that whole set of meditations is to do. Make us kind of acknowledge that this is a part of our life. We have to accept that reality. The first part of that verse, if it's something you can do something about, well, is the fact that death is going to come and you can actually be prepared for it. That's the other part of what we're doing in this course. How do we make sure that when death comes, we're not sitting there going, oh shit, this is, was not supposed to come now. I'm not ready for death. You have to back off. You're going to have a mind that's very unnerved and upset and what have you, because you haven't worked with what is necessary to prepare for it. So prepare for death. That's something you can do. Why get fearful and anxious and stressful about death? Instead, do what you can every day of this life with your backup plan to use this life well, to do everything that you need to make sure that when death comes, you go, oh, this is what I've been preparing for. Here it is. At least die without fear. Again, the greatest practitioner is said to actually die with some anticipation of death, like, oh, this is great. I've been waiting for this and I've been preparing for this and I'm ready to die. Okay. You may not be there, but at least no fear. At least like, okay, this is what I've been doing every day to get myself ready. And so I don't have to have any kind of trepidation around this happening because I'm ready. The last things, let me just go through this last little bit real quickly. Sadness, of course, sadness is a part of it. And it's okay to feel some level of sadness, as it is okay to feel grief. Grief has to be acknowledged as a common human emotion that is speaking to the love that we have. There's that other phrase, they say, grief is love having no place to go. Where like the being or whatever that we loved, that is, you don't have that anymore. That love, it doesn't have that being to go to. It still is in our hearts and in our history and what have you. But that's what grief feels like. The being who we loved and who we extended to isn't there. And so sadness ensues. So recognize that that's a part of it. And again, we don't need to wallow in it. We don't need to get overwhelmed by it. We accept that it's going to happen and we'll have the waves of sadness we experience sometimes in very difficult situations. But guilt shouldn't enter into the picture. Guilt is a kind of interesting human creation, even a Western creation to some degree, as I understand it. I always point out that in the Tibetan language, they have no word for guilt. Guilt is not a word in their language. Guilt is different than, I'm going to try to get, I don't know if I'll get a chance to talk about it tonight, this process of purification. In purification, you deal with 4 sort of powers that help you to remove any of the sort of unwholesome seeds that you might have planted on your mind through moments of anger and moments of yelling at people through harsh speech or whatever, all these ways that we've harmed others and harmed ourselves. The very first of these powers is called regret, or sometimes remorse. Regret and remorse are not guilt. Guilt acknowledges, yes, that we did something wrong, similar to regret or remorse, but then it layers on top of it, and I'm a horrible person. Guilt has that view of ourselves as being lousy, awful. Oh, I can't even stand myself. I did that. I'm such a horrible person, right? That's guilt. And that's the guilt that we often feel around our various actions that we've engaged in that have harmed others or ourselves. It's not a wholesome emotion because you have this perfect, pure, pristine mind. You are not sort of inherently evil and awful and bad and whatever words we want to throw on ourselves when we have that mind of guilt. So guilt is not productive. Guilt is something that we can replace with a much more wholesome regret, saying, okay, I did that. Through the force of my crazy mind, through the patterns and habits that I've gotten used to in this lifetime and in other lifetimes, I've done those things. That doesn't make me a bad person. Makes me, again, just like everybody else, to a large degree, we all do things that we regret. We shouldn't feel guilt about it, though. So again, guilt can be overcome pretty easily. Those are the sorts of emotions that tend to arise around death and confronting death and looking at our lives and what have you. I think most of you have some understanding of these 4 opponent powers. Purification is the technique, the method by which we can do the work to remove any of these things that we've planted in our minds. When death happens, we're going to be looking at the actual death process 2 weeks from tonight. Next week, we're going to go more into, again, that 3rd set of meditations that have to do with what's useful at the time of death. In the fourth class, 2 weeks from today, we're going to look at the process of death as it's taught in the tantric teachings of Tibetan Buddhism. Everyone says, oh, no one knows what happens when you die. Well, the Buddha has explained what happens when you die, and it's a process of the consciousness losing grosser levels of awareness, but manifesting at a very subtle level. And it's that sort of subtle level of mind that goes forward from lifetime to lifetime, sort of the thread between all of our lives. And what we carry forward is all the imprints we've made on that mind, karmically, through our thoughts, actions, and so on. All of that, if it's something we don't want to carry forward, we can get rid of it. We can purify it. So we're going to, I don't think, again, we have time to look at this tonight because I don't want to go too far over this, like quarter two, so that people aren't here too long. But there will be a meditation. Let me go ahead and point these out to you. And the 4 opponent powers are there, and we'll review them briefly at the beginning of next week. This was handout 3 that, again, is out there on the website, a link to this out on the Google Drive that I've set up. This just goes through the points that I went through earlier tonight before the break, right? Life expectancy in this human world is uncertain, many causes of death, and the human body is actually very fragile, and kind of helps you to get to that conclusion. You can work with this and just kind of read through it and then maybe sit and reflect on it. You don't have to do it in formal meditation, but spend some time kind of analyzing it, thinking about it to try to get to those conclusions. Here's the 4 opponent powers. It usually starts with regret. And you think about the things you've done without a mind of guilt, but actually generating a remorse, a regret that you did those things so that you can now purify them. Be kind of motivated to remove those from your mind stream. Then there's a power of reliance, where we look at what are we relying upon. In the Buddhist tradition, it's 2 main thoughts, refuge and bodhicitta. Refuge is kind of renewing our commitment to the Dharmic path, the Buddhist path. And bodhicitta is renewing our commitment to all beings, wanting to be a benefit to them because they're the ones we've harmed through so many of our actions. Then we do something that's an actual remedy. And there are any virtuous action, any positive action can be a remedy. This meditation doesn't introduce one of the common ways of doing that, which is the Vajrasattva mantra that you recite. You don't have to do that, though. You can do any of the things that are mentioned here, or any virtuous activity. And then you make a resolve not to do these things again. That's how we actually change our behavior, is that 4th opponent power where we say, okay, I know I've stepped in it, and I want to be free of that kind of negative energy that goes with me having stepped in it, but I need to stop stepping in it. I need to stop doing it. If I keep stepping in it again and again, I'm just going to keep creating the causes for future suffering, and I'm never going to get free of all of this. Oh, I have a nice little friend in there that a wasp or something, or a bee or something, a bee. Hello.
You try to rescue him, Jen?
He lands, but
It's
Yeah.
open the door.
If we open the door, we was close to the door, but yeah, maybe we'll go out. We might see the light or something. Okay,
oh,
there, he went.
Oh, he did.
After her, yeah.
He went after her. He
Okay.
likes you.
We had a little bee here, just so you know, and
it was
now
huge.
the bee is gone,
In a good way.
in a good way.
Yeah.
Not with its life, not yet. Okay, so again, let's go ahead and do the wrap-up prayers. If you have another question on anything we covered tonight, again, please feel free to just write it down and bring it up next week. We'll have an opportunity at the beginning to talk about any of this. But as I said, the next 3 classes will continue and finish this course on Heart Advice for Death and Dying. Let's do our dedications. I think we have the dedication list that Jana is going to read the names of the beings that we're dedicating for.
We dedicate the merit created from listening to this teaching to all beings everywhere on every prayer list. We dedicate for the health and long lives of all our precious teachers, that they may continue to teach us and guide us. We dedicate for all those experiencing obstacles, specifically Matt V, Jana, Wyatt, Adrian, Lynn, and Gilbert. We dedicate for all those experiencing illness, specifically Lynn B, Amanda R, those with hantavirus and Ebola, Kelly and Marie, Peggy, Lydia, Susie, and Jim. We dedicate for
I
all
need to add somebody to that list. My brother, my twin, was leading a meditation in Santa Fe this afternoon, and a woman had a heart attack.
Oh,
my goodness.
God.
So I don't know her name.
Oh.
Oh,
Yeah,
Talk
well,
about
maybe we can find out.
happening in a very sudden way.
Yeah.
Probably an auspicious place to do that.
Mhm.
We dedicate for all those who are dying or who have died in the last 49 days. all beings who have died, specifically beings who have died due to war and violence, those who have died of hantavirus and Ebola, Michael Lovato, Peggy Ness, Ted Winston, Kopi the dog, Lou DeSantis, Ray Handrick, Michael Tilson Thomas, Michelle Robinson, Ben Eagle, those who died in the crash of the medical plane, those who were killed in the shooting at the San Diego Mosque, Yeshi the dog, and husband.
Any other names that need to be added? Mary Jo Whitman has, I think, something to share. Can you unmute, Mary Jo? Yeah. Yeah.
I'd like to add my cat that went missing. Her name is Ginger, and I'd like her on the obstacle list for now. I'm hoping she will come back.
Yes, we'll make strong prayers for that, for you, Mary Jo, and for Ginger. Anyone else, any names that need to be added? So again,
And
for
for
those beings who
sickness,
stay excited, go ahead.
For sickness, I'd like to add also Allie J.
So again,
Thank
for those
you.
beings, as well as anyone that we're holding in our hearts who we've been asked to pray for or offered to pray for, we dedicate for their welfare. Let's go ahead and do the normal dedication prayers that we do at the conclusion of the time together.
Dedication prayers, once in English. Due to the merits of these virtuous actions, may I quickly attain the state of Guru Buddha, and lead all living beings without exception into that enlightened state. May the supreme jewel of Bodhicitta that has not arisen arise in the world, and may that which has arisen not diminish, but increase more and more. Long life prayers for His Holiness the Dalai Lama, the wish granting, wish fulfilling jewel, source of every single benefit and happiness in this world. To the incomparably kind, intense, and Gyatso, I beseech, may all your holy wishes be spontaneously fulfilled. And for the swift return of Lama Zopa Rinpoche, peerless teacher of the assembly of the children of the victorious ones, Buddhas, victorious Losang Father and Sons, along with the lineage masters, all the objects of refuge of infinite advance, please instill the virtue and goodness of accomplishing this prayer here and now. Holding and spreading the Muni's precious and complete teachings through explanation and practice, you wear the armor of patience that is never discouraged, incomparable venerable Guru to deal by any request. Much striving single-pointedly for the sake of the victorious one's teachings, the sole gateway through which all benefit and happiness emerge, and from other living beings you suddenly departed to peace. What great loss! Nevertheless, through the unseen truth of the blessings of the ocean of the three jewels, and the raving wisdoms of Bodhicitta, the children of the victorious ones, may the smile of reincarnation swiftly beam in glory for fortunate disciples. Okay, thank you, Jen, and thank you all for being here tonight. Again, keep in mind, Sunday is Sakadawa. There will be meditation here at 10 o'clock, correct?
11 o'clock.
11 o'clock here. I'm also, again, leading the practice for the center in Santa Fe that starts at 10, goes to 11:30, that you're welcome to attend. But try to do some wonderful, virtuous, meritorious things that day. They say that day increases our merit 100 million times. Well, it actually increases the power of any actions 100 million times. So stay away from the negative actions as much as possible. But try to do, something good, virtuous, meditate, read, whatever. So, and I'll see you all again next Thursday for sure. Or maybe not. Yeah. We don't know. Hopefully my body will still be here. And my mind along with it. Thank you all again.
Thank
Bye-bye.
Thank you very much.